everyone, and welcome to a wrap-up video. I'm sure you weren't expecting another video just so soon, but there's nothing else to do, so I'm here to talk about all the books that I've read at the beginning of 2020 till now. And yeah, let's just get into it. So I started off the year being in London. I'd celebrated New Year's with Tom and a couple of friends in London, and we'd been walking around quite a few bookstores. So I actually picked up a new graphic novel over New Year's, and I decided, you know what, graphic novel, nice and easy, fun little quick way to start the year off, I guess. So I started the year by reading The Steel Prince by Victoria Schwab. This is a part of her Shades of Magic series, and I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. And I think the reason is that I find graphic novel kind of collection things a bit strange. I feel like they never really stop where I expect them to, if that makes sense, and I feel like a lot of the story happens very, very quickly in graphic novel form. So sadly for me, that means that I'm not quite invested in the characters yet. By the time stuff happens, I'm not quite ready for it. I'm still kind of trying to learn about the character and whatever when action happens, and then I'm like, whoa, okay, action happened, and then the action is done and the book just finishes, which I know is like how most stories are structured, but in graphic novel form, when you have like 60 pages and half of those pages are just photos, yeah, I don't know. I struggle to connect to characters in graphic novels, so I don't really know why I'm reading them. But Shades of Magic is a series I love, so I wanted to know more about this Steel Prince, and this series is following things that we have kind of heard talk about in the Shades of Magic series, but we don't know that much about. So I really enjoyed learning more about the world, learning more about the characters that we followed in Shades of Magic. So for that, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Sadly for me, the graphic novel format just kind of ruins it a bit, I guess. I'm not really that into it. After that, I read The Atlantis Complex by Owen Colfer, which is the 7th and second to final book in the Artemis Fowl series. We're getting there, ladies and gentlemen. This, I think, is my least favourite Artemis Fowl series, and there's a really simple reason for that, and that is that Artemis Fowl isn't in it much, but also that just isn't quite true. He himself is in the story, but he has this weird like schizophrenic disease in this book, and so for half of the book he's a different person, a different personality that his brain just gives him as a coping mechanism, which makes for an interesting story. But when you're reading the Artemis Fowl series, because you like Artemis Fowl as a character, giving you half as much time with that character is kind of annoying. So therefore, this book is a 3 out of 5 stars for me. It's always been my least favourite of the Artemis Fowl series, and I think just in general the story isn't as strong in this book, but it's still Artemis Fowl, which means I still really enjoyed it. And yeah, I had a fun time listening to this on audiobook while walking to school. After that, I read Sheets by Brenna Thumler. I was so excited about this graphic novel. I was like, this is the type of graphic novel I'll enjoy. It's longer. It felt like it was going to be like a proper story. And the story itself sounded really cute to me. It's about a little ghost who, in this graphic novel, the ghosts look like sheets, and he kind of escapes the ghost world to go check out the humans, and he finds this laundry business where he feels really at home because there are other sheets there, and that's just adorable. Sadly though, that was just kind of all there was to the story. I mean, the human character that we follow has backstory and she has depth and stuff like that, but again, the graphic novel format just doesn't work for me because I don't feel like I get to know the characters enough, and I'm not able to appreciate the art to the extent that that balances out my need to understand the characters as deeply as I do in a longer novel. That will always be a drawback for me with graphic novels. So again, this is a 3 out of 5 stars read, and you're gonna see that I did have a really kind of bad reading year so far. Because next up, and the reason I wanted to make this video, is that I read The Poppy War. Now, if you're not familiar with the fantasy community on YouTube or in general, The Poppy War has made the rounds as this new, fantastic book, up there with Brent Weeks and Brandon Sanderson for world building, but with a twist because it's based on Asian culture versus European culture. And I was so excited, you know, I love Brandon Sanderson, I love fantasy, and I was so excited to dig deeper into Asian culture. And then I read the book. So if you haven't figured it out already, Fantasy to me has to get two things right: character development and world building. Characters, I have to understand their motivations, I have to understand why they're making the decisions they're making so that I can move forward into the story and be invested in their story, basically. And then world building wise, I need to understand the world that they live in, the politics, if that is relevant, the magic systems, and the culture of the people and their history. And with so much of fantasy falling into similar ideas of world building and character development, I really need the story to flesh out its world so that it becomes unique to me. The characters in Poppy War felt so much like stereotypes that I couldn't see them as anything other than that. I've read over 500 pages from Rin's perspective, and I have no idea what her motivation is. I don't understand why she made the decisions that she made. I don't understand most of the characters' motivations, and I wasn't invested in anyone's story that was being unfolded. Worse than that though, they didn't even seem to be consistent. Depending on what the story needed, the characters would think things completely opposite to what they had thought in the previous chapters, and then just flip back and forth between these moral dilemmas, but without characterizing them as dilemmas. They were characterized as if those were the initial thoughts of the character all along, as if that was the deep-rooted motivation that the characters had, but that kept flipping. The motivation kept flipping and their thoughts kept flipping. The world building, the world was flat and the building of it felt really clumsy. The writing had a massive show don't tell issue, and I also really struggled to tell all of the characters apart because they were all just written exactly the same. So yeah, from this talk, I am sure you will have gathered by now, but I gave this book 1 out of 5 stars. Really didn't like it. I was about to say I hated it. Let's say I loved to hate it, because my god, it was interesting. So at this point in the year, I'd read 4 books and I didn't like any of them. So I was feeling a little bit down, and I decided to just pick up Artemis Fowl again, because there was 1 book left and I wanted to finish the series. So I read The Last Guardian by Owen Colfer. I think this is a beautiful conclusion to the Artemis Fowl series. If you've been a fan for a long time, you're going to really enjoy this book, and yeah, I think it just hits all of the notes that an end to such a long dedicated series needs to hit. It pulls on some of your nostalgia strings, but not too many of them. And yeah, I just had a really fun time reading this, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. After that, I read How We Met by Katie Reagan. This is an interesting one. I bought this at like a 3 for 2 sale when I lived in the UK in 2014, and honestly never really planned on reading it. I was like, yeah, sure, I can pick that up. That has a nice cover on it. And that was all the thoughts that I'd had around that book. And then I found it for quite cheap on audiobook, so I bought it and listened to it, and I really enjoyed it. It was one of those audiobooks that just dragged me in immediately. It's about a group of friends who, a year before this book starts, lost one of the people in their friend group. She died when they were all on holiday together. And basically it's just about them grieving and trying to grieve together, but realizing that the person who died was also the person who held them together, and how do they keep going now, and realizing that issues that were there before the death are still there now, and how do we cope with them now. It's a very slow story where you follow several perspectives and not that much happens, but I think that's also what grief is. Not much happens, there's just a lot of thinking and time passing, and overall I just really enjoyed being in these people's heads for a little while, so I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read The Gravity of Us by Phil Stamper. Once again, I actually listened to this on audiobook, and the first half or so of the story I really enjoyed. I don't know why, but I just fell into this world again. Something about the audiobook just dragged me in. This is about a boy from New York who ends up having to move to Texas because his father gets involved with NASA's Mars missions, and basically he gets like pushed into international fame because his father is suddenly connected to NASA. He meets other kids in Texas who are experiencing the same thing, and it's just about them trying to like deal with this media madness that they're suddenly in. Now I'm really interested in media. I like the idea of Mars missions, so these two things just kind of clashed together and, you know, made the perfect book for me, I guess. The reason I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars is that I didn't find the second half of the book as engaging, and I don't really know why. I guess it's because it just kind of kept going in the same pattern. The book kind of falls into that issue that YA books often have if they have a romance in them, that the romance takes over the story. It's not to say that I didn't enjoy the romance in this, I actually did, but I felt like it overshadowed the rest of the story for the second half of the book, and it wasn't the bit that I was most invested in. So therefore, I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars instead of the initial 4 out of 5 that I was planning on giving it when I started reading it. Finally, the last book that I've finished so far in 2020 is The Black Prism by Brent Weeks. Again, this is a book that people are like, this is as good as Brandon Sanderson. If you love Brandon Sanderson, you should read Brent Weeks. Which are high expectations to give me in the first place, because Brandon Sanderson is one of my favorite authors. But I also, again, kind of similar to the Poppy War, don't understand how people are drawing that comparison. Because to me, the world in this is bit interesting, the politics is a bit interesting, the magic is kind of interesting, but nowhere near the interest that I would have with a Sanderson book. And then the characters just fall completely flat to me. I had moments in this book where I really enjoyed what was happening. I felt invested, or I felt that I could get invested in this story. And then the next chapter just fell completely dead. I never managed to care about the characters because, again, they felt like stereotypes. I didn't understand their motivations. I felt like there's a really big tragedy that happens at the beginning of this book, and I was really invested while reading that chapter. And then afterwards, it doesn't really matter anymore. Our main character who goes through that trauma doesn't really seem to bring it up again. His whole life changes in the span of a few hours, and he just is okay with that, I guess. No trauma that has to be worked through. He's just like, okay, let's keep going with the story now. And all of that just pushed me out of the story. And yeah, I felt like a lot of the stuff that happened in this book didn't actually have consequences to our characters. Our characters never changed or evolved. They were the same the whole way through. And also weren't particularly consistent. So I don't think I'll be continuing with the Lightbringer series, even though everyone says that a Sanderson fan should be reading Lightbringer. I guess that's just not for me. Those were all the books that I've read so far in 2020. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know down below what your favorite books of 2020 so far is. I would love to hear them and get some recommendations, because clearly so far my reading year has not been great. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!